No one saw this coming. Just days after the world gathered in mourning for Pope Francis, a voice emerged from the shadows, his sister, Maria Elena. What she revealed didn't just surprise the public, it stunned even the most faithful followers of the Catholic Church. She opened a door to a side of Pope Francis the world had never seen before, a deeply human, complex, and at times tormented side. As tributes echoed from every corner of the globe for the beloved spiritual leader, it seemed like everything had already been said. Stories, sermons, legacies, they flooded the airwaves. But then, when no one was expecting it, Maria Elena Bergoglio stepped forward. A woman known for her silence, for her distance from the limelight, suddenly chose to speak. For years, Maria Elena avoided the cameras, the headlines, and any opportunity to capitalize on her brother's global fame. She lived a quiet life back in Argentina while Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the boy she grew up with, rose to become the face of the Catholic Church. But something changed after his death at age 88. Something inside her shifted. What she released wasn't vetted by Vatican authorities. It wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was raw. It was personal. It was something only a sister could say. In her first public remarks since Pope Francis's passing, Maria Elena began with a simple but powerful statement. He wasn't the Pope to me. He was Jorge, my brother. The boy who chased dogs in the yard. The boy who made me laugh when I was sick. The boy who cried the night our father died. Then, she added a sentence that stopped reporters cold. I never wanted him to become Pope. It cost us more than the world will ever know. Those words reverberated through the press, raising questions no one had dared to ask. What had it cost them? What price had Pope Francis and his family paid for his role as the most powerful spiritual leader in the world? And what Maria said next would light a firestorm of debate, devotion, and disbelief. In this video, we're going to unpack everything Maria Elena revealed, stories from their childhood in Argentina, confessions about his final days, and the internal struggles he never allowed the public to see. You'll hear how the church responded, how the public reacted, and why her words are sparking global reflection and controversy. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about Pope Francis. Maria Elena Bergoglio, Pope Francis's only surviving sibling, spent more than a decade avoiding the public eye. As her brother became one of the most iconic religious figures of the 21st century, she stayed behind in Buenos Aires. She gave almost no interviews. She never wrote a memoir. She kept her memories locked away until now. When the Pope died, that silence broke. And what emerged was not a rehearsed tribute. It was a confession. One that was emotional, one that was painful, and one that threatened to reshape his legacy. Maria said it clearly. This wasn't a statement approved by anyone. It came from me, from my heart. She described Jorge not as the pontiff, but as a boy and a brother, someone she shared a life with long before the world knew his name. Then she dropped something that no one expected. There was a time, she said, I wished he would walk away from the church entirely. That statement ignited global curiosity. Why would his sister feel that way? What had she seen? What had they endured? As reporters scrambled for answers, Maria shared even more. Stories the Vatican never told. Stories about a shared childhood touched by joy, but scarred by trauma. She revealed that before Jorge became a priest, before he ever dreamed of the papacy, he was a quiet, deeply introspective boy growing up under the weight of a family secret. A betrayal not of faith, but of blood. Our family was fractured, she said. It wasn't something you could see on the outside, but it broke him on the inside. Maria claimed that Jorge, around age 12, discovered that their father had a hidden second family, an emotional shock that changed him forever. From that moment, she said, he lost his innocence. He began searching not just for truth, but for redemption. And that search led him to the church. He didn't run to God because of calling, Maria confessed. He ran to escape the shame. Suddenly, the image of Pope Francis as a humble reformer took on new dimensions. Was his humility a choice, or a burden? Was his faith a calling, or a means of survival? Maria's voice trembled as she told the world what she had never told anyone before. And just when it seemed the revelations couldn't go deeper, she hinted there was more. Something the church, she said, would rather I never speak about. And that's where this story takes a turn, into secrets buried not in memory, but in Vatican walls. According to Maria, Pope Francis kept a private archive, a hidden file, documents, letters, and recordings gathered over decades, first as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, then as the Bishop of Rome. It was known inside Vatican circles only by a whispered name, Il Dossier Nascosto, the hidden file. She said Jorge entrusted her with a letter and a literal key, the only key, to a private safe beneath Vatican City. If anything happens to me, he wrote, and the world starts asking why I stayed silent, tell them to look beyond the gold and marble. Tell them to look where even light avoids the corner. She never opened the safe, not until he died. And when she did, she found something chilling. In Jorge's handwriting was a confession, not of guilt, but of knowledge. Knowledge of corruption, abuse cover-ups, financial conspiracies, and secret political alliances. He didn't name names, but the clues were unmistakable. Maria said he wrestled with these secrets for years. He feared that exposing them would destroy what little faith the world had left in the church. So, he chose a quieter path, reform from within. Slowly, carefully. But near the end of his life, he questioned whether that was the right choice. He said to me, "Maybe I should have been the Pope who tore it all down," Maria whispered. "Maybe I was too soft." And then, something even more disturbing. Maria believes the hidden file was stolen, removed, covered up. Vatican officials deny it ever existed. But Maria is certain. They know what was in it, she said, and they're terrified. So the question now is, what was so dangerous that even a pope feared revealing it? In the next section, we uncover the final chapter of this remarkable story, a deathbed promise Pope Francis made, and why his sister believes the church will do everything it can to make sure that promise is never fulfilled. Because just days before his death, in the quiet of his Vatican chambers, Pope Francis whispered something to his sister that shook her to her core. According to Maria, his final moments weren't spent in quiet reflection. They were filled with urgency, with one last mission, one final truth he believed the world deserved to hear. There was one final truth he couldn't allow to die with him. As Jorge lay fading, his sister Maria leaned in close. She whispered softly, "You've done all you could. You've carried more than anyone ever should. Let it go now." But Jorge, frail, pale, and weaker than she had ever seen him, took her hand and said something she would never forget. His voice barely a breath, he whispered, "Promise me you'll tell them. Not just about the dossier, but about the children." Maria froze. Children? She didn't understand. But Jorge, eyes clouded with pain, murmured again. "The ones who were never counted. The ones the church failed. The ones I couldn't save." It was the most vulnerable moment Maria had ever witnessed from her brother. To the world, he was the Pope, the supreme head of the Catholic Church. But in that fragile instant, she said he looked not like a pontiff, but like a broken priest, a man crushed beneath the weight of a truth too heavy to carry alone. What he was referring to, Maria would later say, was not just painful, it was buried. Buried under decades of institutional silence, bureaucratic fear, and deliberate suppression. According to her, Jorge had spent years trying to expose what he came to call the quiet tragedies. These were not the cases that made headlines. These were the ones no one ever saw, cases of abuse and neglect that happened in remote missions, impoverished parishes, and forgotten corners of the world. The victims? Often poor, voiceless children from the global south, abandoned not just by the world, but by the very church sworn to protect them. Jorge believed that entire records had been erased, or never kept at all. Maria said he spoke of files that bishops were instructed to bury, of hush money paid to silence those who knew, and of priests who were shuffled from parish to parish rather than held to justice. He tried to reopen those cases, again and again, and each time He ran into a wall, not just in the marble corridors of the Vatican, but in local dioceses terrified of scandal. Over time, the resistance wore him down, and the guilt consumed him. "I wanted to protect the faith," he once confessed, "but I ended up protecting the system." Maria said that was when he stopped believing the institution could save itself. He came to see the Church's self-preservation, its obsession with control and image, as its greatest sin, a betrayal of its core mission: mercy, justice, and truth. And in his final moments, Jorge gave Maria something deeply personal, a simple wooden rosary. No gold, no jewels, just smooth, aged wood, worn by decades of prayer. This belonged to a boy in Argentina, he told her. He came to the church for help. They turned him away. A week later, he was gone. I've carried this rosary ever since, to remember the price of silence. That rosary now sits beside Maria, a quiet monument to her brother's secret sorrow, and the reason she's no longer willing to stay silent. But here's where the story darkens. Why has the Vatican refused to address Jorge's final revelations? Why no statement about his deathbed promise? Maria believes the answer is chilling, because if the world begins digging into those forgotten cases, the ones left out of official archives, the damage could shake the Church to its foundations. She says there are powerful figures within the Vatican who want to protect Jorge's image, to preserve the legacy of a smiling, reform-minded pope who tried his best. But Jorge didn't want a legacy built on half-truths. In his last days, he made it clear, the full story had to be told, even if it shattered everything they had worked to protect. And now Maria stands at a crossroads. Stay silent and preserve the Church's image, or honor her brother's final truth. The choice she makes could reverberate across the Catholic world. And yet what she hinted at next may be the most explosive revelation of all. Coming up in the next segment, what Maria claims to know about the man chosen to succeed Pope Francis, and the secret deal allegedly made before Jorge ever died. As bells tolled across Vatican City and white smoke drifted into the sky, heralding a new era for the Catholic Church, few outside the inner circle knew what had already been arranged behind closed doors. Maria Elena Bergoglio, Pope Francis's only living sibling, says Jorge had long expressed concern about his successor, not over theological doctrine, but over something darker, a secret agreement made while Francis was still alive. She says during one of their final conversations, Jorge looked at her, voice shaking, and said, "They've already chosen him, and he promised them silence." Maria was stunned. Who were they? What silence? Jorge then spoke a name. Cardinal Matteo Tedesco, a charismatic figure in the Roman Curia, admired for his eloquence, political finesse, and rising popularity. But behind the polished exterior, Jorge feared something dangerous. According to Maria, Jorge had uncovered confidential correspondence, letters suggesting that Tedesco had made private assurances to high-ranking Vatican officials. The deal? If elected pope, he would halt all further investigations into the so-called unopened files. Specifically, those relating to abuse cases from the late 1980s through early 2000s in South America, Eastern Europe, and parts of Africa. These were the exact cases Jorge had been trying to expose. The ones blocked again and again by those who feared what the truth might bring. They want history to forget, Jorge told her. But if Tedesco becomes pope, they won't just forget, they'll erase. Maria didn't want to believe it. The Church had endured decades of painful scrutiny over abuse scandals. Why hide more now? But Jorge was adamant. The Vatican, he said, was still torn. There were those who truly wanted reform, and those who would sacrifice anything to protect the institution. To them, old wounds were dangerous. Reopening them, even for justice, was a risk they weren't willing to take. And then something strange began to happen. As Jorge's health deteriorated, Maria noticed his public appearances dwindled. Fewer interviews, fewer unscripted remarks, and most importantly, fewer statements about accountability. At first, she assumed it was simply exhaustion. But then she discovered something chilling. Several of Jorge's closest advisors had been quietly reassigned or removed. Their replacements? All loyal to Cardinal Tedesco. According to an anonymous Vatican insider, there were even rumors that Jorge had been preparing an apostolic letter, a call for total transparency of the church's abuse archives. But that letter was reportedly shelved just weeks before his death. Maria believes that letter could have changed everything. Now, it may never see the light of day. What she is suggesting, that Jorge was politically outmaneuvered in his final days, is a notion that few in the church dare whisper. That the man who led the Vatican was systematically isolated from the very reforms he championed. That his successor was not chosen for his courage, but for his compliance. And perhaps most disturbing of all, Maria says she was warned. She received an anonymous letter, short, just 3 lines, but enough to shake her. And this is where the story turns from shocking to unprecedented. Jorge didn't just confide in her. He left her something. In a modest wooden chest, tucked away in her Buenos Aires home, Maria now guards what may be the most damning collection of documents in modern church history, Pope Francis's private journal. Spanning the final 2 years of his life, the journal is filled with raw reflections, coded warnings, and cryptic notes about people and events never disclosed to the public. One of the first entries reads, "The wolves are circling. My silence is no longer peace. It is fear disguised as obedience." From that moment on, the journal traces Jorge's slow descent, not just into physical weakness, but into spiritual resistance. He details meetings with senior cardinals, pressures to remain quiet, and internal battles between truth and institutional loyalty. Maria says he instructed her to release parts of the journal when the time was right. But now, she's not sure that time will ever come. Since his death, she's received visits. Some friendly, some less so. Church emissaries and anonymous figures urging, pressuring her to hand it over. They said it would be better for the church, she recalls, that it could cause confusion, that it would be taken out of context. But Maria remembers Jorge's words, "You're the only one I trust with this." Recently, she allowed select journalists to read limited pages. One of them, Italian investigative reporter Luca Morelli, described the writings as the most damning portrait of internal Vatican resistance I've ever seen. If authenticated, he said, they could ignite global debate, not only within Catholicism, but across the religious world. But there's more. In that same wooden chest, Maria says there's a sealed envelope. The contents? Unknown. But Jorge marked it himself with the words, "Open only when you're ready to tell them everything." Now, Maria faces the ultimate decision. Preserve her brother's image, or risk everything to fulfill his dying wish. But then, the final heartbreak. Families of abuse victims have reached out to her, begging her to release the journal. They believe Pope Francis documented what no one else would dare to. They believe the truth is already written. All that's left is for someone brave enough to speak it.